Hello everyone. Several years back I did a video about the Atari Jaguar I have, but this is more of a reshoot because I have some additional stuff for the console and I'm just going to redo the video. So if you have no idea what a Atari Jaguar is, it's Atari's last home console before they got out of the home video game console business. So this is the console, and in a minute I'm going to show you how the controllers are, but let's just get an overall view of the console itself. This is obviously a cartridge-based console. Of course, down here says 64-bit interactive multimedia system. Now, of course, there are people out there that is going to say this is not a true 64-bit console. Yes, there are 32-bit processors in this console, but at the time, this was a very, very complicated console to program for. Hence why a lot of the games always seemed half-baked, because developers just didn't really understand how to program for the Jaguar. And Atari, for some reason, didn't give good documentations or anything like that. So we will probably never know the absolute true potential of the Jaguar, but there are some good gems for this console that is worth checking out. So let's get an overall look at the console. You got your power button right here. Now, what's interesting about how Atari designed this is that if there's no game in the console, the system doesn't turn on. So if you have it plugged in, connected to the TV and all that, and you try to turn it on, it's not going to turn on. In fact, I even tried this. Don't try it, by the way. But you know, if you have the switch on and you put a cartridge in, it will turn on. But I don't recommend you doing that. Now, of course, there are two controller ports. So if you want to do more than 2 players, you need one of those team taps, which is a 4. I'll show you the accessory, but you can have up to 4 players on one cartridge, or on one controller port. So if you have 2, you can actually go up to 8 players, which I'm not sure if there's any games that even supports 8 players. But the Jaguar is able to go up to 8 players with those team taps. In the back here, pretty simple. You got your power plug, you got your RF right there, and you got your AV and DSP, which is essentially an auxiliary port. So like any add-ons that Atari was going to do, it would just plug into that. Now, of course, the only problem with this kind of design here, and it seems like they did that to cut costs, is that these things right here is the actual board itself. So part of the motherboard is exposed here. Kind of a cheap way of doing it. I mean, it works, but it's kind of cheap, and don't be surprised if, put it this way, if you are going to get a Jaguar console, actually inspect it, because don't be surprised if these things would be damaged. And of course, you got your cartridge slot up here. It is exposed. Now, some people say that, oh, why didn't they put a door on it and all that stuff? Well, if you look at all the other Atari consoles, they're actually all exposed too. So yeah, it is kind of weird they didn't put a dust cover on this thing, but if you look at the 7800, 5200, 2600, all of their cartridge ports is exposed. There's no door on it. So I guess Atari was just continuing their trend with that. But let's take a look at some of the accessories for this console. So first things first, let's take a look at the controller. This controller gets a lot of flack, and I can understand their point of view, but in terms of comfort for holding this controller, this is really a comfortable controller. If you ever get a chance of playing with the Atari Jaguar, whether it's the standard one or the Pro controller, just hold one, and you actually notice, like, you know what, this is actually really comfortable. Now, holding it is comfortable. The button placements is actually the real complaint here, especially the original version. And when I finally got to try the Pro controller, I was thinking to myself, like, why didn't they use that as the standard controller? Why did they do this one? But then again, they did. So the biggest problem with this controller is the button placements. Okay? Notice how I'm moving my thumb here. Okay? The buttons don't line up with the thumb. Now the B button, the middle button here, is actually placed fine. The A is too high and the C is too far down. So when you want to go up and down, you kind of have to adjust your thumb to go back and forth like this. And that's not really that comfortable, because when you hold it, you know, you put your hands on and then you move back and forth. I mean, yeah, you can still press it like that, but it's not as comfortable. And this D-pad, it's kind of hard to explain why this is not a good D-pad. It's not a terrible D-pad, but it's not exactly a great D-pad. Okay, very good D-pads out there. It will have like a centerpiece that even when you press it, it's still in place. It doesn't move. So when you move up and down, it's actually really easy. This has a very flat feeling D-pad. So when you try to move back and forth, you don't really get that tactile feedback like other good D-pads out there. So that's the button. The way this is laid out here, and this D-pad is probably the biggest issue with this controller. Now, of course, people usually make fun of the phone pad down here, but there are some games that actually utilizes this thing very well. So take for example Doom for the Jaguar, which, by the way, compared that with the 3DO version, the Jaguar version is the better version out of the two. And in fact, at the time, in the 90s, if you want to play Doom on the console, the Jaguar version during the time was actually the best version. And fun little fact, it was id Software's first project of making a game for a home console, because all the other games they made were for the computers. But the Jaguar was actually their first take on putting a game on a home console. So obviously you got the D-pad, pause option, ABC, and you got your 12 button keypad down here. No triggers or anything like that, which is kind of weird, because, you know, when I hold this controller, I normally have my fingers up here, and that would have been the perfect opportunity to have triggers. But they didn't. So let's take a look at the Pro controller. Yes, I actually do have a Pro controller, which is right here. Now let's just take a side-by-side look. Now, they did alter how the Pro controller feels in the hand. So if you look on the side, you notice how angular the face buttons are in the D-pad versus the Pro controller, which is not as slanted. It's actually slightly more flat. And when you actually hold this one, this is really more comfortable. So not only... Now, people are going to say, oh, look, they added more buttons. Well, they added more buttons, but the XYZ and the L and R, so those are the two biggest noticeable differences. But these, the XYZ and the L and R triggers, are actually mapped to the keypad down here. So there are games that supports or utilizes properly the Pro controller. So there's a fighting game I have, Fight for Life, which they designed that game around the Pro controller. Yeah, you can use the standard controller, but it plays better with a Pro controller. Now, there are other games that don't really support it, but because the way they were mapped on the keypad, you can actually, say like Alien vs. Predator. So in order to strafe, you would normally have to use the keypad, but you can actually use X and Z to strafe and Y to pull up the map. So you don't really have to go down here, you can actually just keep playing and use that to strafe. I kind of wish it was mapped to the triggers, but it's still better than going down here and trying to play like this. You know, we don't have morphing looking hand. Anyway, but the biggest improvement with the Pro Controller is this D-pad. This D-pad is a very nice D-pad, much better, and pretty much resolved any issue people had with the original one. So this is obviously not a flat feeling D-pad. This actually feels a lot similar to like a Sega Genesis or a Sega Saturn D-pad. So you got your little piece of plastic, so it actually always stays up, but you can actually move around and it feels really nice. So if you plan on playing the Jaguar quite a bit, it is actually worth spending the extra money and getting a Pro Controller, because this controller makes a big difference. Some other subtle differences is mostly just for looks here. But one thing that I do appreciate is because a lot of the Jaguar games have overlays, so you can actually put the overlays in here. The original one, when you try to take it off, there's no easy way. You kind of have to stick your fingernail in there and then pull it out. This time around the Pro Controller, they actually put a little notch in there, so you can actually just stick your finger, slide underneath, enough to pull, and then you just pull it out really simple. So that's the Pro Controller. Now I have another controller, which is designed strictly just for one game, for Tempest 2000, and that is the rotary controller. It's a modded controller. This is not an officially built controller from Atari. These are projects that people make and then they sell it. So basically it's taken the standard controller and put a rotary dial on here, in this case where the D-pad is at, but there are two other versions. There's one where the rotary dial would be right here, and there's actually a new version that came out not too long ago that the rotary dial is actually underneath here. And if you were to get a rotary controller for the Jaguar for Tempest 2000, get the one that has it behind the controller, because those have little switches so you can switch between the rotary and the D-pad. So you wouldn't have a unitasker controller for the Jaguar. Now speaking of controllers, obviously I have 3 controllers, so what if I want to do more than 2 players? Well, here's the Team Tap. Now, I really got this more as an extension cable, because it was about the same price for an extension cable in this, and I figured, you know what, this might be more useful later on. So essentially it's just taking the player 1 port, and now you have 4 ports on here. And like I said before, if you have 2 of these, you can actually go up to 8 players, which is kind of interesting. So let's take a look at some other stuff for the Jaguar. Now obviously there are some well-known people on the internet that talked about a particular add-on, and that's the Jaguar CD. People made fun of it, people talk crap about it. Here's the truth. Is it a reliable piece of equipment? No, it's not. If any of you guys follow me on Facebook, or if you're on the YouTube gaming community or the Happy Console Gamer community, you're going to know that I've posted pictures, I've talked about it, and even when I got it in the mail, it didn't work. So here it is, the Jaguar CD. I do have a working unit. It does actually work. And really, if you look at the design, and this is something that kind of baffles me about these console manufacturers. Even the current ones right now, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, there are just certain things that just doesn't make sense to me. Why would they even do this? Take Atari, for example, with the Jaguar. they knew they were going to come out with a CD add-on. Why not build this into the console? That just baffles me. I know at the time this was more expensive, but I mean, let's just face it, add-ons for the most part don't work. But for how they designed this, it's actually pretty smart. It actually uses the cartridge port that you normally put in games. You put it on top, snap in the back, there's a little clip that actually clips onto the console, and it's on there. And some people make comparisons to a toilet, but I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, this actually looks kind of cool to me. You know, it has like a spaceship style look to it. And yes, it does take 2 power supplies, so if you're a fan of the Sega Genesis add-ons, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but it does require its own power supply. Now, if you do plan on getting a Jaguar with a Jaguar CD, you might want to look at this. This is something I bought off of eBay. It's a special power supply called the Jaguar Duo Power. And what this is a power brick. And of course the other side you put your power cord and then you just plug it to the wall. And the other side has 2 plugs. So it's one power supply that will power both. So you just take one of them, plug it in, take the other one, plug that in like that, and there you go. Now you have one power supply that will power both of them at the same time. So if you plan on using the Jaguar with a Jaguar CD all the time, or a lot of the times, this only cost me about 25 bucks. This Jaguar Duo Power. Well worth it. And this is actually like a homebrew project someone did. And obviously in this particular run, this is number 31 out of 35. And I haven't had any issues using this with both of these consoles at the same time. So I can actually recommend this thing to anyone that actually has the console. Now let's take a look at some games. Now of course, this is where I normally keep my Jaguar console with the CD add-on just in there. Most of my games I have, actually most of the games I have is actually in the box. So I actually keep my Jaguar games, or the cartridge ones, on my DVD tower, and up there are my Jaguar CD games. Now I think they only made like 13 games for the Jaguar CD, not that many. Correct me if I'm wrong on the amount, but it's well under 20. So not a lot of games for it, and I actually have maybe about half of the games available. Maybe a little more, and the other games I have is actually all sitting right here. And what's funny, this is actually from a cassette tape holder, and I was going to get something to hold this, but it's like, wait a minute, this actually fits perfectly. Oops. So that's actually what I use, and that's pretty much everything I have for the Jaguar console. Now I do use the composite video input. My TV actually doesn't use S-video, so the S-video cables don't really matter much. But one thing I am missing that I'm actually waiting in the mail is the memory track for the Jaguar CD. If you do plan on getting a Jaguar CD, you do need the memory track. Those things aren't really that cheap. Luckily I found one for about $35 shipped, so it's not too bad. Other prices, they usually go about $50 and up. So if you're trying to save money or trying to go the cheapest route of obtaining a Jaguar with this Jaguar CD, you might want to shop around, because let's just face it, this particular console isn't really cheap to play on, for the fact that the console just didn't sell too well, and especially the Jaguar CD is not a very reliable system. It is very easy for it to break, and when I bought mine, I bought it from a company in California. So when they shipped it over here, they even told me it's like they tested out. They actually tested out for several hours with several different games just to make sure it worked properly before they shipped it out. And when it got here, something popped off, so I had to basically press something down to clip it back on, and now it works properly. It works fine. So that just kind of shows you just how fragile this Jaguar CD console is. But it does work, and I actually do use the Team Tap mainly as an extension. So when I do want to change controllers, I can just destroy this thing and not the one on the console. So let's take a look at some games. Let's see what games to play. You know, these are the games I have, at least the ones in the box. And you know, I do have some cartridge games here. Games like, of course, Tempest 2000, Alien vs. Predator. Now, if you are starting out and want to get a Jaguar console with games, some of the games I'm going to recommend is obviously the first two I just said. Tempest 2000, Alien vs. Predator. Wolfenstein 3D for the Jaguar is actually really good. If you like different takes on football games, Brutal Sports Football is actually really good for the system. Other games, Doom, of course, for the Jaguar. Really good game. Evolution Dino Dudes. I think this game is called something else for the Genesis and Super Nintendo. It's actually the same game as those, but this one just has a different name on it. Now, in some other games, let's see, Iron Soldier is actually really good. iWar is surprisingly good. This game is really not that expensive to get online, but if you do have a Jaguar, you plan on getting one, and you want to see what games they offer, this is one of the few exclusives that's actually really enjoyable. Of course, you always got Hover Strike. Rayman for the Jaguar is actually a really good port. This is actually the original version before they started porting this game to other consoles. Of course, Raiden for the Jaguar is really good. And the original Syndicate is actually pretty decent on the Jaguar. That's something the Jaguar is actually good at, surprisingly, are PC ports. So like the point-and-click adventures, and PC strategy type games or sim type games is actually really good for the Jaguar. Even like Theme Park. This one's still shrink wrapped, I just never opened it. But this is a port from the PC version, and it's really decent on there. So let's take a look at some games, and let's just see how they are. And one of the last things I wanted to show you for the Jaguar CD, and if you do ever pick up a Jaguar CD, make sure you get the memory track for the Jaguar CD if you plan on playing games for the Jaguar CD, which is kind of the whole point of a Jaguar CD. Besides playing music on it with the visual light machine function on this thing, which is actually really cool, but the memory track is essential because that's how you save games. Unlike most other CD-based add-ons and systems during the time, they all have built-in memory. This doesn't have any built-in memory. You have to have the memory track in order to save games. If you don't have it, you can't save anything, and you can't really complete games without taking breaks. So you have to do it in one sitting. But these, you can find it anywhere between $30 to $50 depending on where you get them at. So it's not, the price isn't unreasonable. But just keep in mind, if you do pick up a Jaguar CD, make sure you add the calls for a memory track, because that's how you save games.